Teachers and educators are facing mounting pressure to tell parents when students are socially transitioning at school.
This comes after school districts have increasingly been at the forefront of navigating the rights and privacy of transgender students and keeping parents informed of their children's lives at school. Democratic strategist Ameshia Cross is in the studio with us now to discuss. Nice to see you, Ameshia.
Nice to see you, Batya. This is really exciting. I think that, this is a very interesting topic and one that we should probably talk about a lot more, especially considering the crisis and the rise in suicide rates and thoughts of suicide amongst LGBT students. As someone who's worked in in school administration at both large public school systems like Chicago, as well as some of the smaller ones across Florida and Texas, the frustration here is real on both sides. On the one hand, parents feel that they need to know everything about their young people, which I totally understand. But the other thing is teachers and administrators, and having, again, served in those school districts, it becomes very difficult because you don't want to put young people potentially in a situation where you might cause harm. A lot of young people will come out to or have these discussions with their teachers more readily than they will their parents. So I think that it's helpful to fully understand and unpack this, but it's also a very sticky situation for school administrators as well as teachers.
So I want to give the New York Times some credit because I thought this story was very good and very nuanced the way they handled it. It wasn't one-sided one way or the other, so credit to them. Like you said, Ameshia, I think this can be a very difficult situation. What the story describes is all these cases where parents find out that their child is using a different name at school, has a different gender, entire different gender identity, different personality, is socially transitioning, and is maybe finding out more information about the medical side of transitioning without the parents' knowledge. Even in cases, what it sounded like from the story, cases where the parents would not necessarily be opposed to any of this, but were blindsided that they had no knowledge about it. And what really stuck with me from the story was a case of a parent saying, like, okay, again, I'm cautious about this, but I'm not like against it, but the school would call me and tell me if my kid was like not showing up or seemed depressed or was like going through all sorts of other changes. So why would they not tell me in this case, if they're totally reconstructing their gender? And that resonated with me. What did you take away from it, Batya?
I agree with you. The piece was excellent. So many of the parents profiled, probably by design, were liberals, and talking about how frustrated they felt that the only people who would represent them in this fight were conservatives. I believe that transgender people should live with complete dignity and be protected from all discrimination. However, I find myself in this case very solidly on the side of the parents, and I don't think they should have to prove that they're good standing liberals in good standing to have the right to have a say over their children. Teenagers, like, their job is to get into power struggles with their parents. Like, that's just the nature of that age. And it seems to me that the schools have taken this position that really almost criminalizes just normal parenting, and the desire a parent has to know what's going on with their child. And I can't help but feel that there is I think that a lot of these teachers they missed the moment in American history when true bravery was called for, which was during the Civil Rights Movement. We missed that moment. And I think that a lot of people take the energy that they wish they would have been called upon at that moment in time when people were really getting killed to stand up for the rights of Black Americans and civil rights. And they think that they're in that fight now, and they're not. I mean, these parents are not abusing their children. I mean, first of all, the liberal ones who accept that their kids are transgender definitely are not abusing them. But as a society, we have a definition of what constitutes abuse. And in this article, one of the schools was treating it as abuse that the 16-year-old transgender child said, yeah, my mom's okay with it, but she doesn't take it seriously. Like, they were treating that as equivalent to abusing a child. And look, normal people across the political spectrum can accept that that is not a definition of abuse that would justify taking parenting out of the hands of a parent and putting it in the hands of an administrator. That's kind of how I see it.
The big issue here, I think, Batya, is first and foremost, not to do harm to the student. And that's what these teachers and administrators are trying to do. They're in a very sticky situation because there is no playbook as to how to do this. 20 years ago, this was not a conversation in classrooms. 10 years ago, this wasn't a conversation in classrooms. Were there students who wanted to or had an idea of transitioning? Absolutely. But again, it wasn't part of the national context. It wasn't something that districts had to grapple with. Quite frankly, for most people, it is a past 5-6 year thing that they've had to, work within, and it has largely been on a school by school, case by case basis. And I think that the more it becomes a universal conversation, the more we're going to see schools and school districts kind of create a better platform of conversation. Again, being in the classroom, I think that teachers have had to deal with civil rights issues for a very long time. This isn't just something that, has to do with the integration of schools or things that happened in the 60s. Quite frankly, when we're talking about a lot of the issues around gun violence and other things, there are several issues that teachers have to deal with every single day that affect students, families, and their community. So I do, and my hat goes off to those teachers who are bravely doing that work. And in many cases, again, there is no guidebook for it. There is no guidebook to how you talk to a student, and I've had this issue before, whose menstrual cycle started, they don't know what it is, and they think that they're dying because their parent has not had a conversation with them about that at home. When you have to do that, and for me, it was calling up the parent, because what you don't want to do is step in some weird waters, and you don't know what's going on in that household, and you don't want to all of a sudden overstep as a teacher. And I think that there has to be that understanding as well. There are certain conversations that happen in the household and certain ones that do not. And there are students who feel more comfortable, again, having these conversations in a schoolhouse than they do with their parents. That is a conversation to be had within that, I feel, within the family first, but I also question why it hasn't already happened there, whether that student just may not be comfortable with it. For example, young people don't talk to their parents about sex for the most part. People don't tell their parents when they lost their virginity. That's a conversation that is off the table in most people's households. But I think, again, we have to treat this with the care and concern that needs to be there. But also, to your point, and to Robby's point, there has to be some set of guidelines that schools follow, that districts follow. And right now it is willy-nilly, depending on where you live, depending on the school district. And I don't think that long term that's going to be the most helpful solution.
And I understand special cases where if a teacher or a counselor thinks that the kid is going to get beaten or something because he's wearing the rainbow bracelet or something at school, then you don't say anything. It seems like that should be more the exception than the rule, which is what this story makes it sound like. And then also, this, without any disrespect to the people going through this, or young people who are identifying whatever way, I don't care. Young people should embrace and express their individuality and their interests through clothes and accessories and interests. That is actually not new at all. Imagine 20 or 30 years ago, more than that now, so old. Kids you'd have a goth phase or whatever. You'd dress to provoke your parents. That is like a tale as old as time. Is this being treated differently? Because and again, I think it's fine that kids do that. I think that's very natural and very normal and has been part of adolescence and teenage behavior for all time. But now it's getting this special, because it's not just you're dressing like the other gender or you have mixed gendered interests. It's well, you are a boy or you are a girl if you do this. That has a note of finality to it, or a note, because it's transitioning?
Well, it depends, and it does not necessarily have a finality to it. Again, having worked within these school districts, I worked at the largest charter school network in the state of Illinois. We would have students who would transition one semester, and 3 or 4 semesters transition back. I think that we have to, again, these are very case-by-case bases. Maybe this is a long-term thing for some students, and for some, it quite frankly is not. And teachers are still learning through this process. Administrators are still learning through this process, because you still have to affirm the student. You still have to affirm their community. You still have to deal with the parents. You still have to deal with the other students who are in the classroom, who may or may not be, I don't say progressive in terms of politics, but who may or may not fully understand, accept, or want to be a part of whatever is going on in this student's transition. And those are all things that are extremely important and are happening at the same time. Teachers and administrators have a really tough job with this. And I think that, with respect to this conversation, we also have to take into consideration everything that those teachers are dealing with at the same time. This student's transition, the response that other students are having to it, the family, the community, in addition to quite possibly sometimes that teacher's own feelings. And that is a lot to deal with. And there is no right or wrong here. There is no, again, there are no 10 commandments necessarily to speak to how this actually works. And they're doing it in real time.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that there is a social contagion element to this. This is anecdotal, but I have a friend who has a kid in 8th grade. Every single one of the girls in his grade identifies as non-binary, right? Like that's not, I mean, there's just, there's an element of social contagion to this. We know that from the numbers. We know that a huge proportion of young people who identify as LGBTQ do not engage in LGBTQ sexual behavior, meaning that it's an identity marker, but it's not necessarily a part of their sexuality when they engage in sexual activities, right? So, given all of that, I think it's just to criminalize these parents, to treat them as somehow in the wrong, the way they felt in this story, as somehow evil and not supportive of their children, for merely pointing out what we've been pointing out, that maybe this is a stage, that maybe this will come and go, that maybe we shouldn't allow them to do lasting damage to their bodies that will prevent them from ever being able to experience sexual pleasure, that just turn them into the bad guys for they are the ones who care about their children. And, to get between parents and their children is it's just not appropriate unless there is abuse going on. And again, I think that we could all agree if someone put a gun to our heads, our definitions of child abuse would probably be very close to each other. And I think that's just gotta be a piece of this conversation.
Well, there's some advice to the parents. I think if you want it to be if it's just the changing of clothes and accessories and you want it to be a phase, don't overreact to it. Say, they do whatever they want. If they can't get a rebellion out of it, just, again, it's not different from the goth phase or the emo phase or whatever we used to call it before, the tomboy phase. If it's not getting a rise out of parents, then it becomes a phase. In my view. Not in every case, obviously, but I think that's the easiest way to diffuse it. We'll have more Rising right after this.